Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from BoardGameCo, and this is going to be my second BoardGameCo Reacts video, and more specifically, this is a reacting to Quackalope's You Wouldn't Steal a Card, Don't Steal a Board Game. And before we get into the actual video, the conversation, what he's saying, my feedback in it, all that stuff, basically my name was called, and like any good person, if you stand in the mirror and say BoardGameCo 3 times fast, I will do my best, my very best to appear. Although that's a little creepy. In any case, you wouldn't steal a card, don't steal a board game. Now, I'm not actually going to be playing this video because I can cover the main point of the video, at least my perception of the main point, and then we'll go through the comments, and there'll be timestamps below because I'm not just going to be going through the comments. I will also be giving some of the feedback I've seen from publishers themselves on this video, as well as a poll I've put together that I welcome you to take out and answer the poll yourself. There'll be a link in the description down below to add your own perspective to that conversation. And so honestly, my request, if you want to take that poll, my request is that before you watch this video, pause and go through that poll, because I'd rather that your answers in that poll not be biased by this video here. So pause the video, take a break. It's a four question poll, not a lot to go over. Go ahead and do that, and then come back and return to the video. And honestly, it should take you like 20 seconds. I could pause and just whatever, but you can just pause the video. I'll keep going. In any case, so you wouldn't steal a card, don't steal a board game. Now, the video starts off with the premise of you wouldn't steal a card, don't steal a board game, but Tabletop Simulator is not that. Using Tabletop Simulator is not stealing a board game. Now, it goes into a lot more things, and we'll get into that, but I do want to start by addressing those first few sentences because, strictly speaking, as long as you're using the IP, as long as you're using the art and graphics of a board game without the publisher's permission, that I believe, I'm not a lawyer, but I believe that would violate copyright. So strictly speaking, it is stealing. It is a clever title and a clever entry to the video that will get to his main point. His main point is not actually that it isn't stealing, but rather that it's good for publishers and they should embrace what's good for them rather than acting out of fear and trying to shut things down. So I do want to get out of the way very clearly in the beginning that I do believe, according to copyright laws, it would violate copyright and to some extent would be stealing. Now, I have my own opinions on copyright. That's a separate conversation, which would probably get me in a lot of trouble, but I don't personally value copyright in a sense. But that being said, it does fall under the category of stealing, in my opinion, at least based on copyright. So I want to be clear about that. That being said, the point of the video was about the premise that when you have people, the overall point is that Tabletop Simulator acts as a platform that is good for the community and good for the publishers. That is Quackalope's opinion, and I'll go through the comments shortly to go over each one or whatnot, respond to those or whatever. And so the idea is that when a publisher can potentially create their own TTS mod, which happens a lot, and that potentially could build community, potentially could whatever, this, that, and the other. But not very often, sometimes publishers will not only not create their own mod, which they're under no obligation to do so, obviously, but will actively shut down mods that others have built for them. And to that end, they are potentially hurting their community. They're hurting their biggest fans who have embraced their game and set up a mod, and then they are shutting down the community around it, and they are basically just trying to shut things down out of fear that it might be costing them sales, when Quackalope believes that it is building a community around their game. It is increasing sales. It is only a good thing for them. And he's pleading with the publishers under that premise that do what's good for yourself. Don't act out of fear. Do what's good for yourself. And the reason this is important is because, having seen some of the comments, I can tell you many people reacted with the idea that how can Quackalope not respect the publishers? How can he not respect the fact that the work and time and energy and attention that went into building a board game or whatnot? And to be very clear, from my own perception of watching the video, his message isn't one of, hey publishers, you should do things against your own best interests to be nice to the community. His message is you should do things for your own best interests that is also being nice to the community. Now, we can disagree on whether that is true or not. We can certainly have a conversation as to whether TTS mods are good or not good for publishers. But that is his message. His message is not publishers act in a way that does not benefit you. His message is act in a way that does benefit you, and I think you're making mistakes when you shut down community and TTS mods. And with that, overview of the video, let's start going through comments. And by the way, to be very clear, I share his opinion. I share his opinion 100%, but I believe it's a complicated subject and one with a lot of potential fear and lack of data around it, which means I am sympathetic to why you might want to shut down a TTS mod while also believing that you should leave it open. It's a complicated conversation. So I'm just going to scroll through comments and see whatever. Over here we have Wreck and Ruin. As a publisher, I agree with this. Sharing is caring. We're all here for the love of our games. That's a publisher who has embraced TTS. Now, to be very clear, a publisher jumping in and embracing TTS and saying, hey, it's good for us, does not mean that they're right. It just means that they side with Jesse and myself in their opinion that it's good for them. Mario Ad Norman. Let's be honest, if you could pirate a car, you would. Possibly. Irrelevant, but possibly. Diego, just a comment, TTS is not a public space if you have to pay someone else to enter. I guess he's referring to the $20 fee that is involved in TTS. I mean, TTS is an engine that was built that gives you a tool to utilize it. It's not inherently public if you have to pay someone. That's fair to a degree. Handing out takedown notices when they should be offering them an application. So he's referring to the idea of, in the video, Jesse talks about your biggest fans have sat there and put in the work, the time, the energy to create a mod around your game, and then they're handed a takedown notice when a Fatal Paper Cut is saying they should be given an application. Now, an application perhaps is a bit of a stretch. I will say, I know that not Days of Wonder, I know, I can't remember their name. There's a company, Arcane Wonders. Arcane Wonders, I know that they put out their own TTS mods, and I know I saw a comment from Robert from Arcane Wonders that says he has worked with people who've made their mods to make them more, Arcane Wonders featured or deluxeified, but they've worked with people who've made mods. Robin Rising, I bought a 1 versus all game named Dark Rituals. They made a great mod with the first 10 scenarios, and to be honest, it's the only way to play for the next year. Okay. Doesn't really say anything about what past that, but Dennis Hubbard, I played my very first TTS game a few weeks ago because of Quackalope's Pal Discord. I already bought 2 games I otherwise wouldn't have played nor purchased, Brass Birmingham and Beyond the Sun. I'm also likely going to buy Root eventually. So this would be the idea. This idea of what Dennis is saying is the idea that Quackalope and I are pushing for, that the idea that TTS grows communities and incentivizes purchases rather than the reverse. Now, there is potential data to argue that that's not the case, to be very clear, and I'll go into that. Again, at the end of this video, after I'm going through a whole bunch of comments, I will go through some publishers' opinions, feedback, concerns, and a relevant data point from 2013 that is, while not exactly applicable, is a relevant counter-argument to what we're saying. So, at the end of the day, understand that a single person, while I might look at a single publisher and a single comment saying, hey, I've done this, I've done that, that is not data. That is a singular instance. Chris, I've now bought several games I never would have seen if not for TTS. Same idea. Spectre Horseman, it doesn't matter. Modders can still share their mods underground, and they do. Well, I mean, not the point of this video, but technically. Tim Rayleigh, I love your passion. Brett Garland, I definitely don't use Tabletop that much, but one of the biggest things I've used it for is Gloomhaven. I bought it, following type, and was like, wow, blah, 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 Tabletop, Doesn't really say anything about buying it personally. We at Martlick, many of the games in my collection were unknown to me before playing them on TTS. Even now, I use TTS as a way to play my favorite games with friends across the country. I agree completely with your arguments as one of those people who gave my business to publishers because of TTS. And that's going to be a part of it, because something that, and I have a poll at the end like I talked about already, hopefully you already filled it out. One of the things I didn't talk about in the poll is the idea that in addition to your own personal purchasing decisions, in addition to the own idea that you may buy more or less games as a result of playing them on TTS first, something that the poll can't account for easily is the idea of general hype and buzz around your game. There are so many games that come out each year. The more opportunities that people have to play them, the more opportunities there are to potentially buy them. When I play a friend's copy of a game, it doesn't mean I don't, and if I like it, I don't sit there and say, hey, I could just play his copy. I go out and buy a copy. I'm excited for it. When I hear 4 or 5 people on a Facebook group talking about a game they played, that adds to the general buzz. There is a hype and a buzz around games, and that TTS can help enable that, especially in a day and age where conventions are gone, gaming in person is minimal to gone. A lot of things that would normally create hype and buzz around games are gone. TTS, more so than ever, is one more advertising tool that publishers have at their disposal, granted with the potential costs that you're offering a free version of their game online. And again, we'll get to all the cons as well. So, Callum Dice, I wish more games had small demos so we can try out the system before we buy. So, demos are actually complicated. We'll cover that. Extra 24X, the most important message is that you finally played Terraforming Mars. How was it? Otherwise, I agree. As for story games, at least do some sort of teaser demo. Danny Moreno, close your eyes and who do you hear? Will Wheaton. Really? Interesting. Now I want to watch the video again and see that. Peter Vaughn, great topic. Oh, so Peter Vaughn is a publisher. Publisher, fully agree that mods should be allowed by the community. Should be allowed by the community. They should be allowed by the publisher. If there's not an officially released for online version from the pub on that platform, the title of the video made me think it was the opposite point. Yes, Jesse, with the clickbait, which I can identify with, I do clickbait as well from time to time. Just the important thing with clickbait is you want to back it up with good content. Otherwise, well, people won't click next time. Chris Sharp, I discovered Kingdom Death on TTS. Since then, I've probably spent 3,000 to 4,000 on the game and models. So Chris would definitely tilt the data points by a decent margin there. Bryce Christensen, agreed. Dice Throne is a game I wish the devs were more supportive of. They had a demo version of TTS. They have a demo version of TTS, but I spent hundreds on the game. I would love to share the experience with my friends. We'd play the demo of the co-op version. Okay, I would play for the full set. I just wish we could enjoy it together without having to physically be together. Now, so the idea, this is an interesting part of the conversation I'm not really diving into, which is there is an argument to be made about, well, normally I just bring my game over to my friend's house and play it with my friends. And we can't do that nowadays. So I will own, insert game name here, I'll own Dice Throne, and I want to go online and play Dice Throne online with other people. And don't worry, I own the game. How is that different? That is an interesting argument to be made that I don't disagree with, but there are two problems with it. One is it's not my point here. My point is that TTS, I believe, is better for the publishers. That argument that you're making is that TTS is not, that the argument of taking things down is not fair, which is a potential reasonable argument, but one that I am not making. I am only focusing on the idea that TTS is better for the publishers and not that it's better for the community. Secondly is that works, but there's no way to guarantee that the person playing Dice Throne on TTS has a physical copy. There's no like code you can enter or something that stops it forever, although a code is an interesting idea. But yeah, it's a different conversation. It's relevant. I don't disagree, but not the point of what I'm saying here. Paradise Gaming and Comics. I watched this yesterday. To your exact point, the Veiled Fate mod is a couple of comments from December 8th. I don't know if there's it, but your mod may be back the game on Kickstarter. Yeah, so Veiled Fate, actually, I believe they did put out their own TTS mod. I think they decided to open it up. And part of the, we'll save it to then. I was going to talk about part of Veiled Fate and the conversation around it. Blending the Void. I have used TTS a little bit so I could play King Death Monster remotely with friends. I own 2 copies of the core game, many expansions. Adrian M. I agree that when using TTS makes you more willing to buy the physical game. So that is my opinion in general, but there's no guarantees around that, and it's a big risk for the publisher. Maybe a publisher can get agreements like Board Game Arena and pay a small fee to the creator of the mod. So certainly, by the way, something I have seen publishers talk about is that TTS is the Wild West of this space. If there were more controls in place, like Yucata, like Board Game Arena, like Tabletopia, I believe is the other one, then potentially there'd be more room for it to be open, for there to be a conversation about being able to manage the experience in a more controlled environment. Meaning there's 2 objections publishers have to TTS and the illegal mods. One is going to come down to the fact that some publishers don't want their games available online unless they're getting paid for it. And 2 is the lack of control around it, the lack of control of a good experience, one that might hurt people's experience. If I play a game online, Fort is a good example. I played Fort on TTS when it first came out. Now, I actually did want to get the game after playing it. I saw enough promise in the game. But man, that was a horrific experience. Fort is like a 20-minute card game, and on TTS, it's not a 20-minute card game. So certainly TTS adds to the potential for having suboptimal experiences that will turn you off the game. Good days. My tabletop game Escape Death Race 2182 Micro recently funded on Kickstarter. I can't wait to have available on TTS. Good. Okay, great. Kyle Nested. I know this may get buried in the comments, but here goes. I think TTS... Okay, let me see. I think things like TTS are great for the consumer. We try to get games, but I think this idea of hurting the community by taking down mods goes a bit hard to judge. Many of the games are already quite popular, so I would argue that their core communities are already quite well established and don't necessarily need something for TTS for additional exposure. So that is interesting. So I'm not going through the full comment. In general, I'm trying to skim as much as possible, but it's an interesting conversation. So something like Terraforming Mars that already has the hype and buzz built around it is something you're saying that TTS doesn't necessarily add quite as much to the hype and buzz. They already have core communities around that game. I don't necessarily disagree with that argument. I don't necessarily think it's a bad argument to make. Again, data is going to be a big problem here, but I would say first of all, it's an interesting one. I like your point. I like your point. The problem here is going to come out to data. I would agree with you that I think hype and buzz around more well-established, well-loved games is less beneficial. The counter argument I would make is that the hype and buzz, I think the biggest thing that publishers have to fear from TTS is when their games aren't amazing, when their games aren't something that would encourage people to jump in and love that game. Bad games inherently, or games, the less good a game is, the more it will potentially suffer from TTS as people try it and experience it. The counter argument to what you're saying is that the established, well-loved games are less likely to be bad games and are therefore more likely to encourage a positive experience. If I produce game X tomorrow and put it on TTS, who knows what the public reception will be like, and who knows whether TTS will end up hurting my game because it's just not good. As opposed to if it wasn't good before, you wouldn't have known, and you would have bought it because it looked cool and had cool art and minis and whatever. So the flip side is putting a well-loved game that isn't on TTS. Find the most popular game, Brass Birmingham. I don't know. I have no clue if it has a TTS mod, but he put that on TTS, and we already know people love that game. So there's a pro and a con to what you're saying, but I hear your point. Benjamin Eisen, my general policy with TTS is to play games I own, my friends I'm playing with, and or pending arrival. I mean, that's your own policy. As much as that argument can be made, it doesn't help the general conversation. Nathan Strong, you talked about TTS versus physical, but I wonder if it also has to do with TTS versus other digital implementations. For example, Terraforming Mars has a full digital version available. So first of all, I haven't played Terraforming Mars on TTS. I have played Terraforming Mars on Steam, and I hated it. Absolutely despised it. If you want to turn me off of Terraforming Mars, make me play the Steam version. I don't know how people play that game. I don't know how they possibly enjoy it. Maybe I'm doing something wrong, but it's just so slow and so impossible to see what's going on in the game. I genuinely hate Terraforming Mars on Steam. I would not play it again. Absolutely not. I would play it over, set up a camera and have you tell me what to do or something. Steam was for me a terrible implementation. I feel I must be doing something wrong because I do not like it on Steam at all. But that being said, that's a complete tangent to your point. Yes, if a publisher has a online version of the game already, then I would argue that there's more of a reason to shut down the free online version because the pros and buzz and all those things that they're getting from their online version already exists, and now you have a counter one that's free. So I would argue, a lot more if you have your own online version. I would argue for the reasons to shut down a illegal pirated mod would make a lot more sense to me. Again, this whole entire conversation to me is about what's in the publisher's best interest. Jay Aiken, I know that more than one occasion a publisher went after these games because partners were refusing to carry them if they do not step up and defend. That includes distributors, language licensed publishers, and other gatekeepers in the industry. So Jay, I will completely agree with that 100%, meaning if my argument is it's better for the publisher to have this game online, then it is immaterial whether it's better or not if someone else is taking the stance, well, we're not going to carry your game if you have it online. So yeah, in such a case, in any case like that, I would, again, my whole argument is publishers need to do what's in their best interest, and granted, publishers will always do what they think is in their best interest, but that's the whole conversation here. So yeah, in such a case, I would support that, of course. Christian Lieber, an idea for publishers that are worried about their IP rights but want people to play their games. Make the assets available online for your own sources and mark them as non-commercial use permitted. You keep the rights and people can make TTS mods. So Christian's just addressing the idea that there is the possibility, something that Quackalope talks about in the video, of there's the concept out there, if you don't defend your IP rights, then you potentially lose them. People can point to the fact that you didn't defend your IP rights and say, well, you didn't defend it, therefore it's not really true IP. Again, not a lawyer, I'm talking in abstract concepts that I am familiar with, but not an expert in. And so I believe Christian Lieber is addressing that point. Then we have Andreas Gabel. Quackalope is an avid reviewer. Certainly have you spoken to him about this topic or TTS utility? So I can tell you that publishers have jumped in on this conversation. Some support the concept, as we've seen already in the comments. Others have not. And part of the problem is the publishers are going to be viewed as the big bad wolf to an extent, which is not fair at the end of the day. And we're going to come into that when I talk about the publishers thing. Again, timestamps down below because I'm realizing this video is already much longer than I thought. I felt like Tom Franco. I felt like a bit was missing from the start. Yes, it did. If you jumped in, because Quackalope jumped in the video straight as if you were reading the title, which for me, I started and then tried to restart it thinking I was missing something. Henry Lamb, 100% agree. I've gotten to play with all people all over the world. I'm trying to find something more controversial to address. Fire Chicken Reviews, nope. Jacob, I didn't think I was going to side with you so much in this. I can understand the company, but after coming back to it in my head after an hour, I thought board games are so very different than anything else. So I agree with that concept. I agree that board games are very different. I don't think this is equitable to a video game. I don't think it's equitable to a movie, TV show, book, or anything like that, music or any of that. I mean, the most general concept is, think about it practically. If you play 100% of your games with John, let's call him John. Let's say 100% of your gaming sessions are with John, and John has your favorite game. Isn't there part of you that still wants to own that game? Even though 100% of the time that you play it, John has the game anyway. And granted, there'll be some people in the comments down below who are like, well, no, not really, and that's fine. There will be some, but it's so irrational. We want to own the things we love. Access to the things we love is different. And also, the amount of comments I've seen from this whole topic, both where I've posted my poll as well as the topic here, of people who refer to TTS as completely suboptimal, I completely agree. TTS is completely suboptimal. So I don't want to play games on TTS. I do it because I have to, and it is an opportunity to see the promise of a game. You have to walk in knowing that what you're experiencing is usually suboptimal. That's an important point, because if you don't, you might think that, hey, that was a good game, but it's not a good 3-hour game. And in reality, it isn't. It's a good 2-hour game. You just played it on TTS and it takes longer. So you have to walk in knowing what it is, but we want to play real games in person. Okay, I can assure you that showing Root to my friends on TTS made Leader Games sell 2 base copies and 2 Riverside expansions already. One friend is on the fence already, so fully agree with a Quack. Now, Root or Leader Games does have their own version of Root on Steam that I've heard good things about, so that would be a counter argument to the Root thing, but the general idea, again, is true. Okay, let's see. Why not use? Nope, okay. Generally, I agree with you. Okay, I'm trying to find things that aren't the exact same thing again. Okay, yep. I think the mystery Terraform Mars. Yep. Okay. Discussion of online gaming doesn't mention Vassal. Yep. Vassal. I think has an access point that many people have used Vassal, but it's nowhere near as popular as TTS in terms of the general implementation nowadays. Vassal never took off the way TTS. I shouldn't say that. I'm biased. In my own opinion, Vassal never took off the way TTS did. But that's could be because I never used Vassal and I have used TTS. Okay. I'm trying to find more. I'd be interested. Joshua again, I'd be interested to hear what the designers of these games have to say about it. My guess the majority would want people to experience their work. Publishers have different motivations. So I don't know if I agree with that. I would imagine that a publisher and a designer have the same motivation. Anyone in this space, I imagine, most people in this space, let's use most people in this space are in this space for love of the hobby. Very few people are in this space because it's the best way to make money. It's not the best way to make money. It's you might love what you do and be paid for your time. So I don't imagine that publishers and designers do have different motivations. In theory, both of them love games. In theory, both of them love the space. In theory, both of them want to share games and whatnot, but they also want to make money along the way. So I imagine their incentives are aligned. That being said, I don't necessarily know if I value their opinion more than the consumer unless it comes backed up with data. And same with my own. Don't value my opinion unless it comes backed up with data too, meaning at the end of the day, we're all interested. No, that's not true. I do value their opinion more than the consumer. I'll tell you why. The consumer doesn't have anything to lose when they give their opinion. The publisher and designer do. So there's more of a loss. Now they have something to gain too, but they have something to gain or lose versus for a consumer. For you or I to say, make them all available on TTS, we might have both opinions in our head, but we only have one option that's a loss. Not having the games available is potentially a loss. The publisher selling less games is not a loss. The publisher and designer do have to factor in both sides of that conversation, and so I would argue that I value their opinion a little bit more, but also there's the aspect of fear, which we'll get to. I plan on talking about fear because I get it. Okay. Let's see what else we have. My problem with big games like Pandemic, Terraforming Mars, I don't know. Great video, okay. I both agree and disagree. For some games that are story-based, they are only incentivized to make interest scenarios and who knows what value that brings. So I don't necessarily know if I disagree with that. Like, I know Awakened Realms has generally taken a stance of not putting their games on TTS. I think Nemesis is, but other games aren't because they focus on the fact that if it's a story-based game, they don't want you to experience the story that one time and then move on. There's no incentive to replay the game, meaning... Speaking for myself, a game like Terraforming Mars, I will keep forever, I imagine, because I love that game and want to keep playing it. Versus a game like ISS Vanguard or any Either Fields or Seventh Continent, those are games that I don't imagine I'd replay once I finish them. It's not that there isn't replayable content there, you could replay it, but there's so many games always coming out that there will always be another story, there'll always be something else, and so once I've gone through the story, I think I've experienced it enough that I'm willing to move on from it. And so I understand that a story-based game is a different conversation to a degree, having an intro demo might be a different conversation as well. I think it's hard to ask companies to be okay with games being fully available on TTS. I think most companies will be okay with partial ports, and even then... So this goes back to just the whole conversation of ultimately whether it's good for a publisher or not, which is not a clear answer. There's no huge amounts of data to support this. TTS is like a demo for these games. If the publisher is asking $100 for a year or two before delivering, there better be a demo for it where we can actually test it instead of a paid preview. So that's a complicated conversation. The whole nature of allowing people to give reviews. I mean, for instance, whenever I get a review copy from a publisher, they're taking a huge risk because there's a certain degree of hype that goes into a game that people want to get that game, and they will get the game without reviews, without TTS. TTS and reviews give you the opportunity to be a little bit more rational in your buying decisions. I think it's actually a huge thing when a publisher, when a Kickstarter is willing to give you a TTS version, or send me a review copy, or send King of Average a review copy, someone who's willing to give a full, honest opinion of the game. I think there's a huge risk associated. It also means I'm more confident in the design, and I think as time goes on, that hopefully will become more the norm, because as Kickstarter grows as a space, people will want to give their money more to places that let them try their game. But it's a very complicated conversation. There's a lot of risk there. Asmodee is when I see the biggest offender for takedown orders. Asmodee is very, very corporate. They are very, very corporate. I mean, their return policy and parts and pieces, it's a nightmare. Okay, I personally believe that hand-waving the takedowns, no, okay. I personally believe that hand-waving the takedowns as a clear case of piracy is not accurate and does more harm than good. Okay, so you're arguing more with the one for, okay, this is a different argument, not the one I'm making, really. Not the one, I think he's agreeing, it's just not, I'm trying to make the argument that it's good for publishers. Okay. Christian Lieber, again, I think that the biggest problem for both sides is quantifiably. That is 100% true, quantifiability. Neither pro nor con can quantify losses or increases in sales realistically. It's a problem with other media, it's similar that gets copied. So basically the same idea. This is a very valid point. Christian's pointing out that at the end of the day, no one knows what the actual results are. And so that's very hard for publishers to make a decision that potentially has loss in it. And then he goes through a whole reason why he thinks it results in better sales, which I agree with, but there is that risk factor. Okay, I'm going to go down for a few more, and then I'll move to other parts of the conversation. Okay, let me see over here. I am here on the side of no, it is within the rights of the interest of the publishers to protect their IP. So I certainly believe this is within their rights. Their interest is where I'm a little bit, not sure. My personal conviction is that TTS is a substandard approximation of the experience. 100% agreed with that. That is a very reasonable conversation point as to why it should be against their interests. And real digital adaptations do cost money and time to develop. That, to a degree, yes, but the whole point here is that the TTS people, the modders, are creating it themselves. So the time and money to do it, I don't think is a factor here. Discontinuing mods should be a good note if they're intending to make their own at some time. You see it as short-sighted, but instead it's long-sighted. So again, disagreed. Lack of data is the problem we're going to have here. Okay, games like Terraforming Mars or Brass are already available on apps. So yes, I agree with that. Anytime there's an app available, it changes the conversation. It's still not clear, because a free version of the game that you try and then it results in you wanting to buy it is different than a paid version, which you never get. So there's still an argument to be made, but certainly more complicated. It certainly adds more reason to ban it. Okay. That we have over here, rubber duck, check, writing utensil, check, paper. Maybe it's a potato, tomato? No one says potato, tomato. It's potato, or tomato. You don't say potato, tomato. That's not a saying. I don't think it's a saying. But I think TTS mod is more of a different thing than a digital version of the game. It's nothing like a bootleg version of something traditionally thought of. It's more like a new creation of a copy. I don't know if I necessarily get that, but whatever. TTS has been a godsend. My goodness, it's incredible. I've been able to play KDM with friends. It's been a real treat. I've also been able to test games and figure out if I want to buy it. So figure out if I want to buy it is not necessarily in the publisher's interest. That's in your interest. Whether you actually go around and buy it is a different conversation. Ooh, Matthew McHugh. Okay, I'm glad I see this comment. If I made a Quackalope fan t-shirt, would you protect your IP and ask me to stop selling it? How about I'm just giving away? Do you understand the legal implications of not actively protecting your intellectual property? So I haven't read this reply, but I can bet that this reply says, go ahead and do it. Okay, watch. Let's go ahead and read it. Don't claim us to represent them, but if you want to give away copies of our t-shirt and help us market it, sure. We allow publishers to draw, yes, basically. So here's what I already know from speaking to Jesse, from being friends with Jesse. They don't make money on their t-shirts. They sell them at cost. They're not trying to make money, and they don't care if other people sell it. They're just trying to spread the brand. Hey, if you want a Quackalope t-shirt, if you want to spread the brand, then go for it. And this, by the way, is going to be a huge argument in the aspect of publishers doing it. Buzz is a real thing. People walking around playing your game online and talking about it does add to the brand. Now, obviously, if it produces no real sales and just produces a ton of people trying your game, it's a different conversation. But that's the whole conversation we're having here. So I think we're getting on with the comments, which means I'm going to move on from the comments at this point. Let's just scroll up to the top, just so we have, Jesse there. But here's the thing. So there's a lot of comments. I can keep going through them, but the general idea is, yes, I am a big believer in the fact that putting your game out there is likely going to help you in the long run. The more you're going to be hurt by it is going to be the more substandard the more substandard the implementation is. Obviously could potentially hurt it, as people think the experience is not as good. A big one, and this is a really big one, if your game isn't that great, TTS is not going to sell more copies of your game. It's going to give people all the reason in the world not to get it. Now, I do believe most games are good. I have a video coming up about the subject. I believe most games are good. They're just good for the right audience. But that being said, good is a sliding scale. And the closest towards bad that sliding scale drifts, I believe that the more you have to fear from TTS. All that being said, this was a conversation that became a conversation from a bunch of publishers as well, and I do want to jump in on a few points. First of all, a quote from Rado. Someone referenced Rado saying, if I steal your car and then fill it up with gas and return it, I've still stolen your car. Which goes back to my first point I made in this video. 100%, I do believe it still violates copyright. That is a different conversation than whether you should or shouldn't allow it because it's in your own best interest. Meaning the fact that you have the right to say, don't steal my car if you're only filling it up with gas, is completely different as to whether you should say that. If I know that you're taking my car once a week to fill it up with gas and returning it, if I know that that's all that's happening, 100% I'm letting you do it. Are you allowed to? No, you're not allowed to. So I'm going to see that point off the bat. This, I believe, as long as you're using the art of the game, this violates copyright. Now, game mechanics, I believe, are not copyrightable. So you can have the exact same game as long as you use different art and different assets. But the mechanics could be exactly the same as far as I know, and it would not violate copyright. So first of all, if you want to be very careful, publishers want to be very careful with that, because what you might end up doing, if you really crack down hard enough, you might just incentivize people to do the exact same game with different art, name of cards, and all that, but the exact same mechanics of the game, which would give people a further suboptimal experience of your game. So that's a dangerous road to go down in that sense. Past that, some other arguments to be made, and this is a big one, is the state of the unknown is going to be the biggest argument I'm going to make in the favor of publishers, because I can tell you from my own experience running a business that there are many times in life where you have to make a decision as someone running a business as to whether this thing you're about to do will help you or hurt you. And generally, when margins are tight, and generally they are in this industry, in board games, they're generally tight margins. Generally, when margins are tight, you don't have as much room as you'd like to experiment with things that could go in either direction. When you're making money hand over foot, when you're some corporate overlord who has a ton of money, you can risk money on experiments. When you're not making a ton of money and you're just paying the bills and you're getting by, it's a lot harder to say, hey, this decision we make might boost our revenue by 10%. It also might lose us 10%. So which way, meaning, forget that. It might lose us 5% or it might gain us 10%. Making that choice when money's tight is not a safe choice to make. I understand siding with fear. I understand siding with the unknown. And like I said already, publishers are fighting an uphill battle because protecting your IP rights makes you seem like the big bad wolf, and that's not fair. My argument isn't that publishers are evil. My argument is publishers should act in their own best interests. But they're not evil. Any publisher who steps down and protects their own IP, there's a fine line. You have to understand when to do it. I often think it's short-sighted, depending on the conversation, but they're certainly not evil for doing so. The worst case scenario, they're making a mistake, but they are doing what is within their right 100%. That's not a question to me. But the general idea of a publisher, like I have another video coming about this as well, about the idea that publishers don't exist to serve the consumer. They don't. And anyone who thinks they are is the one who's not laying out their money, time, attention, and everything else. They're just hoping another company comes along and says, hey, you should be consumer focused and consumer friendly and help me out. That's not why companies exist. Again, I have a whole video coming about this. But companies exist to pay the bills someone else invested time, energy, and money, and they have to pay employees, themselves, everything else. Now, there is a crossover, 100%. There's certainly a crossover where the best thing you can do as a company is be consumer friendly. I'm always for that. But a company only owes allegiance to itself. That is the nature of the person taking on the risk of building a company. 9 out of 10 businesses fail. So for that, to look at that 1 out of 10 and say, hey, you owe us something. You spent time, energy, and money creating something that I didn't, and you owe us something, that is flawed. That is why my entire video here is about the premise that I believe it is in their own best interests and not in any way that I believe that they owe you anything at all, whatsoever. They don't. They don't owe you a thing. They've made a good game. You like the good game. It's like people, I mean, you have this thing in general, like whenever you have like these conversations about YouTubers who have their house stormed by fans and people are like, well, we're your fans, so we've made you. You owe us something. It's not how it works. In life, when someone else puts in the time, the energy, everything else, yeah, that's all, whatever. I'm going a bit off topic. And so the last thing I'll say is, so let's see. Give me 1 second while I pause this to find something here. So over here, there's an article I forgot to pull up before the video. But basically, there's an article this one 2013, but someone named Jesse Schell put out a study or some sort of data about the idea that in the video game industry, demos hurt sales. And so he pointed out that the average Xbox 360 game sells 525,000 units after 6 months when released with a trailer but no demo. But if you have a demo and a trailer, it only sells 250,000 units on average, pointing out the idea that a demo hurts sales. People are often, there's a degree of FOMO, just like in board games, as we all know, there's a degree of FOMO attached to the idea of, I want that thing. But when you try that thing, sometimes you don't want that thing anymore. And so that could be the argument made as to TTS might be, sitting there and just hurting your ability, hurting the publisher because you no longer need that thing now that you've tried that thing. Now, I'd argue it's a lot different for a variety of reasons. First of all, this is 2013 versus 2020. Second of all, it's a very different market. It's a very different market in general. I think when people sit there and play a game on TTS, there's a significant amount more investment already in this subject. You want to really play that thing that's going to be like, there's so many games out there. There's so many games frequently available that you're always trying to choose what to do. And spending 2 hours playing a game online often has a degree of investment. It's no different than the $50 that game is going to cost. I think it's a different market entirely and not a fair comparison to the space. That being said, it is a relevant data point. If this is the only data point that you have, and also again, TTS is a very different platform in terms of the community building it has around it, in terms of the good time you have with friends, as opposed to that singular video game you played or whatever it is. Now, again, going back to my conversation, this is the biggest reason, this study alone is the biggest reason why I would understand a publisher siding on the side of fear, because with the lack of any real data to the contrary, this alone is a decent argument to be made of, hey, that's a lot of something here that shows that when people try stuff, they don't necessarily get that stuff. And that is, again, going back to my margins thing, if you're not sure whether how profitable the company is going to be this year and things are always tight, which again they generally are, that's a big argument to be made of, let's not take that chance. And then separately from that, because as a result, I put together this poll with 284 responses so far, but I want to get that up a lot higher. And again, this is no different than the game demos can hurt sales argument. This is not going to be any form of valid data. Now, what I would be intrigued by, before we go into this, I don't know how easy it would be to do this. I would love to see the data behind game sales or game popularity or titles owned, units owned, whatever something we can do here about games that have a TTS implementation versus don't. I'd love to see the data around that. All data points come with inherent flaws of things that aren't taken into account. That's going to be true of Shell's study about video games. It's going to be true of TTS things. You could put a correlation and say, hey, look, here are all the games that have TTS mods and how many units they have. And people will make the argument, well, the reason that one has a TTS mod is because it's so popular, so more people wanted to make a TTS mod. You have to figure out how to do it in the most ideal way possible, but I'd love to see that. That being said, in the meantime, for lack of anything else, I put together a little 4-question poll about people's own TTS usage. And the way it goes right now is, have you ever played an online implementation of a board game? Yes or no? If you want to know, the poll ends right there. If you go to yes, it goes to the next question. Have you ever played a board game online that you likely would have bought and then decided not to purchase it as a result? And so the answer there is 34% of people said that they did not buy a game. At least one time, they did not buy a game that they would have otherwise bought because of TTS. This would be the thing publishers are afraid of. And speaking for myself, at least one time, I think only one time, there was a TTS game that I played, and as a result, I did not back the Kickstarter. So that's a relevant argument. Then we have I don't know is the 8.5%. The next question is the reverse, is the exact opposite. Have you ever played a board game online that you likely would not have bought and then decided to purchase it as a result? And there the answer is yes, 52%, no, 41%, I don't know is the, 5.6%. In other words, while 34% of people did not buy a game they otherwise would have, 52% of people said that they did buy a game they otherwise would not have. And speaking for myself, while it's only happened once that I did not buy a game because of TTS, multiple times I have gone out and gotten a game because of TTS. And so, again, that's just me. I'm talking about the general and my own opinion as well. And then this is the big one, because quantifiability matters. In your opinion, because yeses, even though the yes is higher in the second question than the first, I still want to know this one. In your opinion, has playing board games online caused you to purchase more games or fewer board games? Meaning just because you answered yes to both questions, the question is how much. Let's quantify that. And so to some degree, that's not quantifiable, but we have 50% say roughly the same. Meaning it hasn't significantly impacted their buying experience. 17% say they're not sure. 8.1% that they said they believe they have bought fewer games because of TTS. And 23.6% say they believe they have bought more games. In other words, a 3-to-1 ratio on the potential benefit of TTS compared to the potential downsides. Now, again, this is not completely valid data. This is 284 people. This is flawed data inherently because there's no way to guarantee anything. This is just their own opinion of the conversation. You can even make the argument that it's biased data because maybe they know that they want to see and that whatever it is. You can make any arguments you want. That being said, what I would say is if I was a publisher, and it's a hard answer to make, but I believe if I was a publisher and if I generally had good feedback about my games, I would put them on TTS. If I generally got mixed feedback about my games, I probably would not. Now, that's just my own opinion. That's easy to say and easy to go with because I'm not running a company around production of games. I understand the reason why a publisher would not want to take that stance. At the same time, I believe they should. And that, again, should for their own interests, not for anyone else's interest. That's been my BoardGameCo Reacts videos to You Wouldn't Steal a Car, Don't Steal a Board Game. Significantly longer than I thought it was going to be. But that's a typical BoardGameCo video right there. And as always, I'm Alex Radcliffe from BoardGameCo. And until next time, have a good one.